All right, guys, we are about to go absolutely bananas. And I'm bringing on one of my favorite guests, been on the show 2-3 times. We're just going to shoot the shit. We're just going to have hopefully a good dialogue, MMA. We're in this corona pandemic. My main man, SuckerPunch Entertainment, David Arvelo, my man, how are you doing?
I'm good, brother. How you doing today?
Man, we're doing good. It is a crazy time. Of course, we're at home, and, me with all the kids. Half of it is amazing. There's so much time I wouldn't get. There's, all these little things that I'm around every meal, we're tracing letters on the living room table and we're doing meals and it's awesome. But holy crap, those teachers deserve a raise. Am I right? Holy crap, man. It's tough.
Yeah. I mean, no kids on my end and stuff, but I've got, plenty of friends who are in the same boat as you. And, maybe, you see those things floating around on social media, different memes and stuff where like, oh yeah, like, I saw my neighbor walking out to her car and scraping off my kid's a terrific student bumper sticker from their car.
Right. Forever, my man, I've been, my wife is a really given person. It's one I married her. I love her to death. And, at the end of the school year, back in the day, we used to give an apple or you give a little $5 thing. And she would always do, Starbucks, gift cards and Target and make this really cool thing. I'm like, babe, that was like $30. Like, that's nice. Like, that's a really good gift. I'm just going to give them straight hundreds, almost on a weekly basis now. They have all those teachers out there. Holy crap. But, okay, let's get into it. I want you to take the floor and, I'll let you start. There's definitely want to talk about that insane car that Dana White is trying to get. I'm calling it 249.5. I don't know if it's 249 or 250. Yeah. I heard a little bit of both. So we'll call it 249.5 unless you have a little insight on it, but we'll let you run with it, man. We'll have fun.
Yeah, cool. I've been talking to a lot of people and it's like, obviously since this stuff kicked off, I remember I was in a restaurant with my wife getting some dinner and, I watched live as like Mark Cuban got the text message, that the NBA was suspending operations, at the end of that night. And, there's another game coming up after that and those guys were already like warming up and then they decided that they weren't even going to play that game.
Right.
And they just had the guys go back in the locker room and leave. But, after the Mavericks game was over, but I kind of knew at that point that, stuff was just going to start dropping from that point. And then, within even the next 24, 48 hours after that, shows just started, just dropping like flies, basically. I mean, we had guys who were, already down in South Florida who were, going to fight on a local event down there. And, the city of Miami pulled any and all event permits, but before they even had weigh-ins. It was just, and so it started there. I had to work on get some of our people home and, it just kind of all started from there. And I remember when the stuff first started to kick off, I told people, like they're, fighters or coaches are asking me like, oh, like, how long do you think this will be? And I'm just like, dude, they start doing stuff like this and you start to get states of emergency. Like, in certain areas, it doesn't happen as often, but like further up north up here, maybe down in Florida, you might get a state of emergency for a hurricane for,
right.
a week or two, something like that. Up here, it happens more just whether it's like crazy storms, hurricane stuff, or a lot of the times just really bad winter storms and blizzards, but a lot of people don't realize this or they just don't know. But if in most places, if a state is under a state of emergency, all non-essential government agencies shut down for the most part. People aren't coming into the office. People are staying home. The schools are usually getting canceled. That's even just for weather, blizzards and stuff, much less, something like this virus. But when you're under a state of emergency, there's no athletic commission in most places. Like 99% of all the states in the country right now, their athletic commission is grounded until further notice. So you have no commission, you have no sanctioning, you have no show. Virtually every state in the country, you can't do a show without the presence of some form of sanctioning. You have the whole, Indian reservation, sovereign land thing that, it can be somewhat of a loophole, but even the UFC found out that it's just in the current climate, that's just not something that was even an option to them. And if anyone could be perceived to be able to make that stuff happen, it would be the UFC, right?
Right. Of course. So just real quick on that day, but isn't
Sure.
Florida seems like the one state that's still open for business? Everything I hear that they're open for business.
Yeah, well, I mean, technically they are, and there's a set of guidelines that they would want people to follow to where, like, if you go through, the machinations of that, you'd be able to, have an event. But what a lot of people don't understand too is that, like, the UFC, or WWE, someone who is at that level, they can do a closed event, and the revenue model for them is more heavily predicated on,
Right.
revenues coming in from broadcasting and endorsements,
Right.
and, the ticket sales are not a huge chunk of it. Whereas if you're a regional promotion, pretty much anything outside of the top couple of shows in the country, like, UFC, Bellator, and PFL, the model is totally reversed there.
Right.
The majority of your money coming in is strictly from ticket sales. And then you have sponsors and everything on top of that, and maybe lower end broadcasting deals. And obviously the Fight Pass promotions are, dealing with this stuff too. In most places they aren't allowed to do it, or maybe whatever the terms that they have with Fight Pass, they're getting a certain amount of money coming in from that. But, still the majority of all promotions, the lack of ticket sales is, especially if you're doing all pro show, like an all pro show is, kind of a non-starter in most places.
Right.
So that's the thing, is that, like, just because in Florida you can do it, there's very few people that could do an event under those conditions and actually do very well. There's a ton of fixed costs that no matter what you're going to incur to do a pro show, right?
Right.
Even if you slashed fighter purses down to nothing, like you were paying guys next to nothing. You're still dealing with all these other, factors that come into play. You have no ticket sales, so that's tens and tens of thousands of dollars minimum of revenue that's not coming through your doors. And that's the stuff that I think, maybe some people weren't thinking about. But, also too, local sponsors. I mean, some of these businesses,
yes,
they're going to be going through a situation to where even once stuff opens back up, I mean, when you talk about some of these businesses who've had 60, 70, 80%, or even close to 100% drop in revenue for months at a time, if they're even still alive at that point, their level of support is going to have to change or potentially go away for a while, because they've got to get back on their feet.
Right. And I'm so happy you said that, David. I had two things I definitely wanted to inject. One was sponsorships. Absolutely. Even on the Fight Bananas podcast, we have 4 sponsors. 3 of them have been with us for over a year. Every month, we love them. They love us. And we talked about it. They desperately want to stay with us. We want to stay with them. Yeah, we worked on it. We of course, we did what we had to do to work on it, and we're still moving forward. It's not the same, but it's a give and take right now. It's a hard time for everyone. So I am so happy you said that, because big sponsorships for a local MMA event, it's a little bit of a, hey, they're showing my friends, look at this, I'm sponsoring this. They give you a table, you know what I mean? That's part of it. When you can't go to the event, and that's where I really want to hit on, is the fans. Yeah. I never really, I'm a big wrestling guy, so I'm watching WrestleMania, and I'm like, it was going to be in Tampa. We were going to go, the whole family, we're going to do it. I never really recognized, even in an MMA event, when Masvidal knee Askren, the whole crowd, the roar, everyone jumping, that's a part of the show. That's a vital, integral part of the show. And to see a local MMA show with no fans, it's kind of blah. I'm just going to be blunt about it. It's kind of blah without, 600 people or 900 people stuffed in a bar. You know what I mean? It just is.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, there's a lot of shows. I've spent pretty much all of today talking to promotions in different parts of North America, and even people overseas, are dealing with similar issues. And it's just, what I think a lot of people aren't thinking of is that, like, let's just say, hypothetically, and I'm not going to get into the weeds politically and stuff here, but let's just say sometime in May, things open back up, or beginning of June, things open back up. I mean, different states are looking at different stuff. I mean, here in Virginia where I'm at, they already canceled school for the rest of the year, and we're looking at, I think it's like June 8th or something like that is their projected end date to, the current restrictions and stuff. So,
wow, really?
Yeah, and that could change, who knows, but given our esteemed governor and just the utter genius that he is, he, who knows, he'll probably just keep it going just because. But you have that stuff. So let's just say things open back up, and, you have one side of the fence that's just like, man, whoever does the show first, they could just kill it because, people will be so stir crazy and, they'll want to buy tickets and come out and have fun. And it's like, that's hypothetically possible, but, we're coming up on record setting levels of people filing for unemployment now.
Yes.
So many people have been furloughed, laid off, had their pay slashed just to even still get something. Some of these businesses, unfortunately, are going to potentially go under, or they're just going to have to face a lengthy recovery process because, they will have been without damn near any of their revenue for months on end by the time this is all said and done. So, I would kind of err on the side of caution in that just, if you're doing a show and you sell out normally and you're selling just for the purposes of easy math, 1,000 tickets every time, rain or shine, your average show, if you have all your fixed expenses and everything else is the same, but all of a sudden you sell 60% of what you usually would, or even 50%, maybe less, depending on what area and just how bad things were impacted economically. I mean, some people, this, the coronavirus pandemic stuff is going to bankrupt them. Other people will have dipped significantly into their savings. Maybe some people are, shooting from the hip a little bit and going a little crazy, but most people are going to pay their rent or their mortgage or their bills before they're going to go and spend a couple $100 on tickets to a local show. So that's the thing, is it's like, I know up here where, got different things going on show wise up here, and, where I'm at in the Mid-Atlantic region and just other people I've talked to. I mean, as much as a lot of people would want to do shows as soon as possible, most people I've talked to are kind of unanimously agreeing, for a show under a traditional promotional model on the regional scene, you're looking at months being needed to let things recover to a point to where it's possible to really do it and not take a huge loss for most people. And even then, I think sponsorship and ticket sales will still suffer for a while, just because, this month, 2 months plus potentially of the economy just, getting jacked up by this stuff and people being out of work. I mean, that's a very real and lasting impact for a while.
Right.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm so happy. This is the other side. This is a really smart conversation, and I love it. I hope the world should listen to this one. I really do like it. Everyone is just so A, B, and C. This is so, to me, X, Y, and Z. This is like the behind the scenes stuff. This is great. And kind of to bring another little wrinkle into all this, same thing. It happened towards the end of March. I've talked to, we've had 20 podcasts, some elite UFC fighters, guys that have had 10 wins in the UFC, budding, professional guys right on the rim, like a Sherrard Blackledge, who's right there about to be a UFC star, and amateurs. I've talked to everyone in between. No one, not one of them is trained in the same exact way like they were 4 months ago. That's just life. No one's the same exact right now. So what you're saying is that everyone's just going to jump right into life and get right back into it. Maybe some of these fighters are going to be like, guys, hey, let's call a spade. I'm 10 pounds overweight. I haven't trained with my best training partner because they're stuck somewhere else. Like, it's just
10 pounds is probably pretty light on that scale.
That's me, brother. That's me. I got the 10-pound quarantine right now for sure.
It's, it's funny. I've actually just, my daily routine hasn't really changed that much and stuff like that, but I'm actually, probably one of the minority of people who's, losing weight during this stuff. But, that's the thing is it's like, and what we were talking about before is strictly just the economic side of things for a promotion. And,
Right.
for, your average fan who's coming, for fighters, if you're a big draw and you're selling, 100, 150 plus tickets, you're crushing it every time, coming back from this, I mean, dude, you're going to have a drop in numbers. Like
Right.
that's just a fact. Like the impact of this stuff is too widespread, but that's not even talking about the fact that most places and most metropolitan areas across the country have shut gyms down. And maybe some gyms are allowed to, you hear things about certain gyms, that have a pretty high concentration of UFC fighters. They're basically essentially having to sneak people in and do very low key training sessions where, like, you're not training with the normal mat full of pros. You might be training with you, a coach, and one other person.
Yep.
Because,
Yep.
if
I know of
people
them.
yeah, oh yeah, I do too. And, if cops are driving around and they see that there's 100 cars
Oh yeah.
parked out front of a gym,
Busted city.
yeah. So, it's just, and then there's some people who don't even have that option. Like, I mean, local governments or, police departments or whatever have really clamped down on it and have told, this has happened. They told people under no uncertain terms, if you try to use your gym, if you guys, don't stay closed, like, you will be fined, you'll be arrested. Like, in some places it's getting to that level. So they don't even have that option. So, I mean, there's guys, potentially training for, high level fights. Jessica Andrade was talking about it. She was training with, like, her wife, just because that was another person she could physically train with in her home.
Right.
I mean, I know guys right now who maybe or maybe not might potentially have fights coming up. Maybe they're kind of in limbo. I know guys training with their wives.
Jeez.
Who aren't fighters, but it's just another person that they can physically move around with.
Right.
And so It's like you've got guys, the weight is going to be an issue for some people. Overall readiness is just going to just drop, across the board because, some of these guys don't even have another partner to actually train with.
Right.
Wow. Or it's like, a guy's wife who might be a super nice lady and, good at many different things, but, she's not a coach. She's not a great pad holder. She may not even have a white belt in jiu-jitsu. Maybe she might have a white or blue belt or something higher, and she can at least help, her man out there or vice versa if it's a female fighter with her significant other. But a lot of people don't even have that.
So crazy. Hey, let's get back everyone into it, guys. I'm Dave Van Auken. We're talking to David Arvelo, SuckerPunch Entertainment Agent. I have a question and then probably another topic to get into this kind of the XYZ of everything.
Sure.
I always hear big businesses every year, they want to trim the fat towards the end. They want to 3, 5, 10%. They want to cut, the big businesses. One thing in a weird way, agencies, podcast, or MMA organizations, this might be a backdoor benefit to this is maybe it's going to trim some of the fat. Maybe some of those fighters that, fluff on some organizations, they might just slip away. Maybe a bad organization to deal with, they might drop, agency might drop, whatever. One, do you think that could happen and be a benefit in this? And then my second kind of question we can really dive into, every fighter on social media, Twitter, Instagram, everyone's, I want to fight. No, get me on Fight Island. Get me on this card. I want to fight. I know. There's a couple, and of course, I will never call them out. That's just who I am and who you are.
Yep.
I know there's a handful, and that's just the people I know and talk to on a daily, weekly basis that don't want to fight. They don't want to fight in this. Like they said, they are 15 pounds overweight. They haven't trained in the gym that they're used to. They are trying to stay away. They don't want to fight until fall. They've told me this. I've heard this. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
And do you think that's a real issue?
Oh, 100%. And then also, too, you might have some people who they feel that way, but just, if they don't have another source of income coming in, maybe their savings wasn't in, the best place. Maybe they just got into a big show and were starting to finally break out of just like the usual struggle of, being an up and coming regional fighter where you're just not making money. And, and then all of a sudden this stuff happens and shuts everything down for months. I mean, even at a high level, if the UFC is able to get their shows off starting in May, like they're planning on doing now, you're still wiping 6 to 7 weeks minimum off the board for them, which that's going to set them back immensely when it comes to like the roster and just personnel and, getting guys fights and, ditto for Bellator. They're talking about maybe being able to start up, into the summer and, just even if the stuff is crazy, they can do a closed set situation. So, some guys don't want to fight, or some guys are in a situation to where they really don't want to fight, but they're, they may have to do that just from an economic perspective, just because maybe their normal job that they were working at otherwise has ceased operations for the past 2 months. And, so like, that's just kind of a bit of a ugly side to it, is just, right. You have that. And some guys just don't want to fight because they don't want to risk it. And that's completely understandable. I mean, just concerns about potentially catching, the virus alone is one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is, some guys are just going to take a step back and look at it and be like, man, I haven't had a real training session in 6-8 weeks, or more potentially the longer this thing progresses. Maybe I don't want to go and fight
right
a high caliber opponent when I've had a couple mitt sessions in that whole time, and it was from my significant other who is not a coach in any way.
Right.
I mean, it's like, how are you going to train to, fight a guy, from up your way? Like, how are you going to train to fight a guy like a Mike Davis or, or something else, when you haven't even been able to spar with anyone in 2 months? You haven't even been able to get a real training session in.
Right. Oh,
it's like guys going in compromised and stuff is an issue, or just, lack of readiness, or just like, what they would normally need to take a fight, fitness and weight wise, that's going to be completely thrown off. I mean, there's just all these other things that factor into it. And it's just, I kind of predicted from the get go that this stuff popping off like it did, even if this lasts for a couple months, month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, God forbid it's not more than that. But, even that is going to set the regional scene back realistically more like 6.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I'm so happy you're saying this. I'm with you on that. It's a major, major issue, especially for the regionals. We're hoping, UFC gets back in. We'll maybe tips on that card a little bit later. Hopefully Bellator, PFL 1, maybe, we're thinking June.
I mean, that's even with the PFL, the thing there is that they would have to change the format, probably put on more fights per event, or otherwise make some format changes, just because if you look at the normal schedule that they've kept, and you spread things out how they've been spreading out, assuming they don't make changes, they're going to hit a drop dead point pretty soon.
Yes.
If things don't open up to where, from a timing perspective, they're not going to have what they need anymore. So they would have to alter their structure, or potentially, just from a logistics standpoint, have to potentially abandon their traditional tournament structure and just do some events just to keep things going, and then resume their normal tournament structure in 2021, or start their tournament and have it end into 2021.
Right.
And
I was going to say, with another side of that, Dave, too, is, with them, PFL being on ESPN, ESPN2, when everything kicks back in, just say if the NBA comes back, so that's playoff basketball, that's your stations are all, booted up. ESPN Plus or UFC is going to be on all the time. I know it sounds so crazy. College football, if they come back in that late summer, there's going to be so much content, everything coming back at once. Maybe the ESPN's like, dude, PFL, we don't have this Friday night for you. We have Lakers playoff basketball game on. You know what I mean? We got LeBron.
It's who knows, because it's like, at the end of the day, like, different events and different sports and seasons are, structured in certain ways during certain time periods, to the point to where you don't overload your main networks with all this live sporting content that, it can't compete against each other past a certain point, because it'll just bottom out everyone's ratings just because you're just oversaturating things. So, I mean, that's a whole nother set of concerns. And I think too, this is, I'm big into, some video game stuff, more like wargaming stuff, just like super OG nerd stuff. But, it's a big gaming term. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but like the term meta. Like, do you know what that is?
No, I know Meta World Peace, but I don't know meta.
Oh, gee. Okay. But, so, the term meta kind of essentially means like just prevailing trends, like what's kind of in favor right now, what's a particular combination of things that might be good, a usual formula for success, essentially, right?
Okay.
That's a very intellectualized version of like a gaming term. So, this is really going to throw off like the year in and year out kind of flow and meta of, guys matriculating up and down from big shows a lot. What a consequence that people weren't even really thinking about at first. But, if you look at, the last couple of years, right, you have, the normal flow of things, you have the UFC, Bellator, PFL. Those are your top three promotions in North America. And then, therefore, by extension, the majority of the world, except for, ONE FC in Asia, and then like ACB, not ACA, and, a couple other large Russian promotions, right? But, end of the day, in North America, it's the UFC, followed by Bellator, then PFL. You have the regional scene, you have the normal ebbs and flows of that. And then, there's kind of boom periods where, guys will get signed, in advance. Maybe they'll get signed, for short notice debuts throughout the year. Then you have a huge influx of talent into the UFC every summer coming from the Contender Series, right?
Yes.
But now, who knows what's going to happen with that ultimately? Because, like I said before, it's like even just close to a month and a half to 2 month gap in shows contractually is going to set any major organization back so far in terms of like fights and being able to like offer fights in a timely manner with all the people that they have under contract. It's like most of your, multi-fight agreements with these people, there's clauses in there that, deal with activity and what the promotion's obligation is to provide a fighter with activity. So you run up against that handicap. So this is really, if you're a regional fighter coming up and you still have a fair amount of fights to go before you're, kind of in contention to maybe matriculate up to a bigger show, this is going to really affect you. It's probably going to wipe 5 to 6 plus months off the map in which you otherwise would have potentially been fighting. And that's not me being pessimistic. That's just
that's real
being
talk.
Realistic from an economic perspective.
Yep.
Unless all of a sudden the majority of promoters on the regional scene in the country just wake up and decide they want to start losing lots of money, which, guys like Dean Toole tend to not wake up and have that thought.
Nope. Doesn't happen through his mind.
It's, so, there's that aspect of it. And then if you're a guy who's on the cusp, it's just a whole set of new circumstances that no one ever thought they would be dealing with. Because, I mean, dude, you have historically, we had World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War and all the stuff that came from that, nuclear war panic, Vietnam, the oil embargo, even 9/11 set the NFL back a week. And then things resumed, right?
Right.
We've had Ebola, and SARS, swine flu, all this other stuff that's happened, right? Nothing has ever impacted pro sports in the way that this stuff has.
Agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Nothing's ever shut everything down worldwide like this. So if you're a fighter and maybe you were right on the cusp of, getting into a bigger show, at this point, obviously I'm sure the UFC wants to have the Contender Series like normal. They want to do all these other things, but this has really set them back. So it's going to set back their normal kind of cycle for, acquiring, new talent, because they're just, they're behind on fights to a lot of people that they have on the roster. Who knows that, if they're able to get a series of the Contender off, when does that happen? When does that end? Are they going to take on as many people because of, that already backlog that they're dealing with? You had some guys even from this past season who weren't fighting until early 2020.
Right.
So,
and David, they use the Apex. Yeah. The Apex could be where UFC 250, 249 is at, and all these other shows. That's another sidebar to it.
Sure.
And then you mentioned 9/11, so I got a funny one for you. I'm a junior in high school. I'm playing basketball, 4 years basketball, pretty good in my heyday. You know what I mean? It happens. I remember to this day, 2 days later, we had basketball practice. That day, of course, everyone was sent home. The next day was like a thing. We all stayed home. And then I remember calling our coach and like, hey, are we practicing today? He's like, yeah, let's just come in. Let's just kind of get a little bit of normalcy. Let's just kind of run. 2 days later, we were in the gym shooting hoops. 2 days. This is already a month, and we don't see the insight yet. There's talks of it. There's talks of some events, but there's no definite end game yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of this is speculative, but it's just kind of the problems magnify the further this goes along. But like, it's just that like 2020 could end up being kind of like one of those just like strange years where it's like a lot of people who might have, been on the cusp or maybe in time for Contender Series, or maybe, you fight through the summer, have one early fall fight, and then you might be right there. I mean, this is going to set people back a lot, and it's like, listen, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm dead wrong. You know what I mean? But I just don't think I am. And, from talking to the people that I've talked to and just kind of, looking at things, taking a step back, it's just like, there's no way that like some of these things, aren't going to be like real issues for people. It's just unavoidable just from a practical perspective. So, it's just crazy, uncharted territory. It's like you said, I mean, 9/11 happened. I was back in football practice that same week. I mean, it didn't really change much, but it's like with this, I mean, any major sport, organization, league, team, whatever, right? You have months of, your schedule either getting interrupted or postponed or straight up canceled or whatever. Like the lasting consequences of that are really real. I mean, this stuff put the XFL under, realistically. Yeah. And they had gotten off to a cool start.
They did. They had a really good run that first week, second week, and they were. Remember, the quarterback was getting some buzz to be a backup. Like, there was getting a lot of good buzz. Vince McMahon is 0-2 on that. Another point you said I definitely want to hit on, and I know you're a football guy. I know you're a New York Giant guy. Am I right on that one?
Yep. Most of my life it's been fair. The past few years it's been foul, but fair or foul, I'm a Giants fan till I die.
So you'll get this. There's always, every year, there's a diva wide receiver or there's a corner that didn't get paid. They sit all OTAs. They sit the training camp, and then the first week of spring, they sit, and then they come in, they sign the deal, the franchise tender, all that. And of course, what does he do? He always pulls the hamstring. The ankle is always a little sore. So with what you said, minutes ago, some of these UFC fighters are going to go from hitting, the pads with their wife in their second spare bedroom into fighting Justin Gaethje at UFC 250, and it's just going to be this total, like, holy crap. I feel guys are going to pull muscles. There's going to be a lot of weight misses. I just see a ton of mess the next 6 weeks if UFC just pulls forward.
I feel like commissions, wherever these things are taking place, there's going to have to be a degree of flexibility, especially under these circumstances. If you start talking about, under, the conditions that most of these guys are in, and then all of a sudden you need a replacement on a week's notice, I think you're going to have to see more catch weights. I don't see how that's going to be as avoidable as it would be under normal circumstances. And the way that's usually going to shake out too is, you're going to see, I think, statistically less short notice signings to say the UFC or even Bellator or someone else, because again, they're behind on fights to a lot of people on their roster. And, from an organizational standpoint, they're always going to want to try to offer a vacancy to someone on the roster first, if it's possible. Right. And then if it's not possible, they go outside the organization. But now some of these guys, even if they might not be as prepared out of just, being stir crazy or just, a lot of cases, I think just kind of desperation.
Yeah, they need the 12-12.
They got to fight. But, they may not be able to make the weight. And some guys are in a situation to where maybe if they're coming off losses, maybe they're in a situation to where they have to potentially fight, or maybe they end up having a premature parting with an organization that they're signed to. I think also too, just with the being behind part, you're going to see, you mentioned it before, trimming the fat. I think you're going to start to see some pink slip fights a lot more than you normally would. It's like if, maybe you were 1-1 in your first two fights and they both went the distance and maybe you weren't particularly awe-inspiring and, you maybe won your last fight, but then you lose your next one or, just all kinds of stuff. But if it maybe wasn't the best fight, you can get cut off a single loss just because contractually most organizations are able to cut you even off of a single loss. And then if they start removing some people from the roster, that decreases the backlog for them. And then eventually once they get to a better point and, things rebound from this, they can start to bring in more people to the roster again.
Right.
But I think you're going to start to see, another, stretch of months where you're going to start to see guys get cut loose a little bit before you'd otherwise think they would be at risk of that.
Right. With that, and you said about a pink slip, so that really kind of sprung a question on me, and it was just off the top of my head. With you dealing with all your clients and even yourself, and maybe it is different between you and the company and your clients. Just to throw out a name, one guy we both know and love, Chase Batwell, right?
Yeah.
Is the UFC, is it so iconic? Is it so the top of the pinnacle that, just say PFL or Bellator, they say, hey, Chase, we'll throw, I hate throwing money out there, but we'll throw $20K at you to show 15 to win, 20 to win, whatever. Or the UFC says, hey, we're going to come in, you're 4-1, 5-1, we're going to do the 12-12, 15-15, and we move up like that. Has the UFC have that much of a pull on the this generation of fighters coming up that kids will be like, no, that's the big leagues, that's the pinnacle, that's where I do want to be? Or is that $8,000 per show, is that big of a difference for, regional guys like that?
Well, I think it depends. I think nowadays you're starting to get people being a little bit more open-minded to wherever the good opportunity is.
Okay.
But it's like I think there's a lot more parity in terms of your major organizations and it'd be kind of a like offer a lot of the time. So, in years past, let's say if we're talking, 2010 to 2012, 13, 14, even like somewhere in that era. Okay.
Okay.
The UFC is number one, no doubt about that. Then Bellator is number two. And, kind of across the board, there was a pretty significant drop in pay for most people. And, starting pay in those organizations wasn't the same and everything else. And then, once World Series of Fighting came into, play, which is now the PFL, they were kind of, that number three, promotion that kind of came in and started making a big splash right out the gate, signed a lot of big, vets and, other stuff and started to get going. There used to be more of a difference, whereas like now, you talk about another, guys that we might know or whatever, you get a guy like, a Mike Davis from down there, other cats, from Florida, if they sign with the UFC or they sign with Bellator or the PFL, if they're like a talented prospect who's, getting his first crack at a big show, realistically, like not Bellator undercard type stuff, because that's like a different tier of fight really, but like, a multi-fight contract with, the long-term in mind. The pay is going to be pretty similar. And sometimes, because the UFC does have, the name value and the pull that they do, sometimes maybe another organization might end up making a little bit stronger of an offer to, a guy that they would want to get their hands on and stuff. So, some guys, they just want the UFC. That's all they want. That's what they're focused on. They're not really as interested in a Bellator, a PFL, or a ONE FC. And, I think from my perspective, I think it's just good to, lay all the options out on the table. You weigh the pros and cons and stuff. And, if a guy, wants to maybe pass on a similar, potentially even more lucrative offer because he wants to go to a different promotion and he's fixated on that, then okay, ultimately that's their choice. But I think more and more people now are being kind of open to the fact that like, if the UFC is going to, give you the best offer and, you feel like you have the most potential to do well there, awesome. But, you can also do very, very, very well for yourself in Bellator, PFL, ONE FC. You have guys making a lot of money there. I mean, I think, some of these guys who have won tournaments in the PFL are guys that, it would have taken them years fighting in another promotion, years and years, to make that same level of money, in less than a year. You know what I mean? It's so, I think it's all worth considering now. And the opinions of a lot of fighters have changed because they've just realized that, like, man, there's good opportunities all over. I mean, everyone starts this stuff for the most part. Oh man, I want to be a UFC champion. I want to fight in the UFC, but the thing is, it's like, I feel like sometimes people might overcomplicate things, right? Like, go here first and then do this or that. And at the end of the day, your starting pay on an intro level deal once you exit the regional scene and move up to a bigger show. If it's the UFC, if it's Bellator, PFL, especially outside of the tournament pay structure and winning the million at the end of a tournament, your pay is going to be within the same overall range. And you're only ever going to get to these bigger, more lucrative contracts for the most part if you get into a big show and you stay in a big show and you keep winning.
Right.
If you go 0-3 in Bellator, PFL, or the UFC, you're going to make damn near the same amount of money, and then you're going to get cut.
Right.
So, regardless of where you go, you're only making those, Cowboy Cerrone, McGregor, Masvidal checks. If you're getting in and you're just kicking ass, sometimes for a very long time.
Right.
So,
right.
At the end of the day, take the good opportunities, and then at that point, go out there and do your thing and, win impressively and progress, and, the money will come. But, if you go to the UFC and lose a couple fights, or you go to Bellator and lose a couple fights, no one's throwing millions of dollars at you coming off of that.
Yeah. And I think the game has changed. I think we're on the same page as this, that, me too, man. I've been a diehard fan my whole life. I liked the UFC before it was cool to like UFC. And I remember Sean Shirk, the main event in pay-per-views. I've been with it since UFC 9 and above. So the UFC has me, but it's just, to me, in 2020, and the UFC is still the pinnacle. Yeah, I would love to work there. I would love to, hey, I'm doing the interviews in the background. I got great hair. You never know. I could be there in 2 years. But if Bellator or PFL, if these major organizations that are on national television, it seems like they're right there. They're paying well. Like, that's it. I think they're as close as the UFC as they have ever been. They're paying well. I think they're, with them being on great networks, I think that definitely helps. I think it's I think the fighters too there's so many too. It's a fast growing sport, and there's so many 23-year-old, badass fighters, and then maybe ever before. I think the talent pool is probably as big as it's ever been. That there's got to be guys or girls, that go to one or Bellator or PFL. I just think that's just where we're at now in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you 100% there. And I think too, with fighting, it's a little different because there isn't the same kind of funnel like going upwards, and there's not the same kind of barriers to entry that you encounter in some other sports, right? It's like there's different things that come into play if you're playing baseball or football. If you are a really good football player at Fort Union Military Academy, where I went to, high school and stuff, you're getting looked at by a ton of high level, coaches and scouts, and, the team gets a lot of attention, so if you're a very good player, or even, if you're not, a state champion quarterback or first team all-state quarterback, but you're still putting up good numbers, you're still getting a lot of looks. Whereas if you're, a great quarterback or a great running back, but you're from a tiny town in the middle of nowhere and BFE, Southwest Virginia, with a high school of 500 kids, and you're playing single A football, you could be a state champion quarterback and hardly get any looks or attention because people aren't paying attention for the most part in the same way that if you're playing for these other programs. And, that continues to go up. You talk about college sports, which the NCAA, is your typical funnel for all these major, sports, especially football. Baseball, it can be different, but, for football, if we're just running with that, you play at a top level school, like, Florida State, University of Miami, Virginia Tech, some of these other, Ohio State, just big programs, and you do well there, and you're starting, you're playing, you're putting up good numbers, and your tape is good. you're going to get way more attention there than, playing for the,
Utah, South Carolina State. Yeah. Mississippi State.
Mississippi Valley State Delta Devils. That was my favorite low-level team to play with on NCAA football back in the day.
Damn, there we go. There we go.
You're not getting the same kind of looks, whereas in fighting, obviously certain promotions are better platforms than others for fighters working their way up, right? Like, that's undeniable. But at the same time, if you as a fighter, you can be judged, a little bit differently. So, let's say you get to 10, 12-1 or something, right? And you're on a great winning streak. You're finishing people. And, maybe, ideally you have, good coaches, good management behind you, and your record's looking great, great win streak. You're exciting. You're finishing people, you're beating some quality guys at the end of a really good run. You could be fighting in a small local show, and guess what? You still get called up to the, highest level organizations in the world for your sport. Even if you're fighting in a town that no one's ever heard of at the local bingo hall, that's still way more possible in fighting. And I think that for the most part, that's a good thing. It's way more possible to do something like that in fighting than it is in some of these bigger team sports. So I feel like just the talent pool is large, and it's just like there's not the same choke points to entry, in fighting that there are in your other team sports where you go to school factors into it, who your coach is factors a lot into it. It's not strictly just based off of talent and performance.
Wow. Yeah. That's the truth. It's just the game in 2020, and most of what we're talking about for the first half of this has been Corona and pandemic and all that, and the UFC is trying to get back first, and I think that's why they are probably the number one. They're Dana White is full force, full throttle on it. Man, I had another question, but then this thing popped up, and it was kind of, I think this is a good little theory for us back and forth, is I guess in the last, I would say, week, David, that the MMA media especially has been really anti-UFC and Dana White. And it's like, to me, it's so blasphemy because it's, same thing with, I don't even think I'm a media member. I think I communicate, and it's a podcast. Like, I don't think Joe Rogan's a media member, right? But, I don't understand why you want to be negative towards the industry leader and only bring more negative press towards it. And, I think we should all try to put it, especially in this time, more than almost any time in our lifetime, right? Let's push everyone up. Let's try to give fighters more money. Let's try to give the company more money. Let's try to give people more of a platform. Our podcast has been on fire the last 3 weeks. We've done more interviews than ever, and our numbers have tripled, quadrupled because of more listeners, because there's not anything to do. Why can't we all bring each other up? I don't get the negativity towards the UFC and Dana White. Am I off on that?
No, I don't think you are. And I mean, it's a nuanced situation for sure, but like at the end of the day, whether it's the UFC or just business in general, right? Whether you're, the Ultimate Fighting Championship and you run that business, or you're running another large corporation, or you're running just a smaller local business, but you still do well. You have employees, you have clients, you have people who, enjoy and purchase and sometimes like also depend on the products and services you provide. The longer and longer this drags out, damage that gets done just across the board to everyone, like at every tier of this, right?
Right.
So whether it's the UFC or you change that to, not even another sporting organization, just a large company, at some point, if you're the captain of that ship and you're running that company, you have the concerns about the coronavirus, you have all that stuff, and it's a serious issue, right? But you can't, the economy itself or any business within that doesn't have the option to still keep everyone on payroll and to, keep everything, pay their bills, pay their, rents, you have all these different things. Like, no business or economy can continue to operate as they normally would without making massive cuts to staff and, potentially going out of business. If they're not taking in revenue and performing the normal functions of their business, Like, no business can survive that for a prolonged period of time. Right.
Right.
And so it's just like, I feel like, okay, yes, it's the UFC. Yes, it's sports, it's fighters. And, I feel like the sports media in combat sports is a lot more passionate and supportive of athletes than it might be in other team sports, where, in some other team sports, the media is kind of just very critical of athletes. Whereas, the media in MMA tends to be very pro fighter, which, like, dude, that's great. You know what I mean? It's great that, these guys don't have to worry as much about showing up to press conferences and having these guys trying to trip them up and, get them to, say inflammatory things that'll get them in trouble or, whatever the case may be. But, at the same time, it's just like, dude, you have fighters that need to make money, and you also, fighters have families, gyms. That's another layer of business that's being just killed by this stuff right now. Gyms in most places are forced to be closed, and memberships are dropping off because some of their members don't have jobs anymore. And, so you have that layer of it. And then on top of that, it's just like, if there's no sports, if you listen to like the, kind of more far end of like the doomsayers on this stuff, and there's no sports for 2020 or just something insane like that, right? Like, some of these media people, more and more of them are potentially going to start to get laid off too, because revenue for advertising and everything else, which is a main revenue stream for most sports media, that's going to dry up, because those same businesses that are advertising with you have suffered huge cuts. And it's just like, the UFC is a huge company. They're owned by a huge company, but no company is immune to the negative impacts of spending months and months and months without really taking in revenue while you're still incurring all these expenses. So it's just kind of one of those things, like, for better or for worse, it's not an option, whether it's the sports, themselves, or just in general for the economy or just business as a whole. You can't just stay in your house until this thing completely blows over, if that takes but so much longer. The UFC is still a living, breathing, functioning company that runs by the same set of rules that other businesses do. And no one is immune from potentially, dying during this stuff, if things, financially get to a certain point. So some of these guys just have to realize that, it's like, if you're a business owner, especially, the UFC is, pretty well known for looking after their people. And, the UFC hasn't, laid people off in the same way that a lot of other companies have. You're trying to look out for your people. I know so many business owners of all kinds that are still doing the best they can to pay their staff and to look out for their people, and it's just, at some point, things have to get moving again. Otherwise, like, if the UFC has to stay shuttered for another, 3, 4, 6+ months, or just something crazy, if you believe kind of the doom and gloom side of things with this, no one's immune to potentially getting shut out of business.
Right. Wow. David Arvelo, SuckerPunch Entertainment. What a insanely great conversation. Just brilliant stuff. We were bringing stuff out of left field, and I'm loving it. I guess kind of, not maybe in closing, but maybe if I had to ask you, it's, April 20th and going forward, if you can put what you think is not a bow, but some kind of end game or some kind of, idea or hypothesis of when we kind of get back, when does mixed martial arts get back, maybe the big boys, maybe the lighter guys, UFC Fight Pass, more content. When do you think, you probably talk to a lot of people, and, I don't want you to, spill the beans or anything, but when do you think that we get back into, PFL's on a Friday night and UFC's on a Saturday and Bellator does 2 shows back to back? Like, when do we get back into that?
I think ideally, as long as they're not being shut down by local governments, and or meddling outside political pressure, I think that within the next couple of months, we will ideally see, the UFC and Bellator, hopefully the PFL as well, be able to move to at least, closed set options. And it's
And do you
well,
think that's
hopefully,
viable, the closed set options? Do you think that will get us by until the fall?
well, it's viable for a small amount of promotions whose economic model really isn't predicated on ticket
Right.
sales.
Just those three.
You know,
Just those three. The
pretty
PFL.
much just those three.
Right,
I mean,
right.
if anyone else kind of below that can make that work, you'd have to get very creative and hope that a lot of your sponsors didn't get just economically just shellacked by this stuff and are still able to support you at the same or potentially increasing levels to make up for lack of ticket sales. So, I think, the UFC, they've got the apex, and as long as they don't get shut down by the Nevada or any other government agency where they try to do a show, they can do a closed set option. And yes, they take a hit, but it's a hit that they can still navigate forward and be okay. Bellator, again, they're owned by Viacom, so, they're going to have access to similar, studio situations to where they can do those events. And yes, again, they take a haircut, but they can still push forward. Same with PFL, they would be able to do that and, have access to that stuff. So they can do it. But so that's one thing. So the top three, not even talking about things overseas, but just, in America, and in North America in general, the top three, it's feasible as long as they're allowed to by local governments that they can get back to at least doing closed set shows within the next, month, 2, 3 months, right? I think that's what's going to happen. Hopefully that's what's going to happen. At least definitely I think it'll be happening with the UFC and Bellator for sure. Hopefully the PFL too. Some of your Fight Pass promotions, I mean, ideally, again, I would love to see it happen. Can it happen? It really just depends, and it's going to be tough for those people to even make that work, financially a lot of the time with zero ticket sales, right? But the regional scene, I think, as much as, again, I would love to be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I wish I'm wrong. But I just don't think I am. Realistically, I don't see the regional scene getting to return to even a decent semblance of normal again until end of summer, early fall. And that's assuming that we have, a drop dead point for the shutdown stuff at some point in May or the beginning of June. I think it's just going to take a lot of time for, things to rebound economically, for promotions, for, fighters to be able to train, and also fans to be able to potentially put some more money in their pockets, because some of these people are going to come out of this. It's like, yeah, okay, the economy opens up, but their job is gone, or maybe their workplace is no longer in business. So, it's you're going to have a lot of lasting effects of this. I mean, this is going to wipe for regional fighters coming up. This is going to wipe the majority of the year off the map realistically. And it's like, again, I wish I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. But I think just realistically, and from talking to most people that I've been talking to, especially throughout today, in different parts of the country and North America as a whole, that's where everyone's at. I mean, there's events that were scheduled for June that are already getting canceled and or pushed back now. Yeah. And a lot of that's very optimistic, and they could have to change that again in a couple weeks. So I think realistically, that's what we're looking at, man. You probably won't see a more normal regional schedule of events until at least the fall for the most part.
And Dave, I'm a positive guy. I'm a glass half full guy almost always.
Me too.
And I think you're almost being too late. I think it's 2021. I really do. I think there's no way that I think we did talk about it earlier. It's not even the promotions getting back into their venues and getting some of the sponsors that maybe need it, or even new sponsors. There's a new sanitizer sponsor that gets in. It's not that. It's the 1,400 people that 700 of them are not working at all, or did not work for 8 weeks, or so instead of telling your girlfriend, hey, I'm going to this show here in Jacksonville in September, she's like, show in Jacksonville, babe, we're 2 months late on the electric bill. We need, you're staying home, maybe pick up an extra shift and then pay the electric bill. Don't go to watching a show. So
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, demographically, MMA fans tend to, have, pretty solid metrics in terms of, employment and income, but that was before just something that's like economically just catastrophic like this, as far as what the coronavirus has done, to most sectors of business. So, I mean, you're right. It's like, okay, they put it in place to where, people can't get evicted while there's a shutdown and stuff. And, people can't get their utilities turned off, during this stuff, for non-payment. But as soon as that stuff ends, that stuff is still due. Like people
Right.
weren't absolved of being several months late on their rent or mortgage or their utility bills or just all these other things. And, maybe they had to bleed themselves completely dry financially. So it's like, even with a couple of months of recovery, if things open up at some point in May or the beginning of June, you could do a September show, and odds are your turnout is still going to take a hit. Your sponsorship levels are still going to take a hit. I mean, there's just no way that doesn't happen to a significant degree. So, like a true normal, like we're talking about pre-coronavirus,
Right.
day-to-day stuff. You're not probably going to see a return to a true normal for the regional scene and just the sport as a whole until I think, like you said, 2021. But you'll have some promotions that are at least going to be in a position to where they can get a show or two off in those last couple of months of the year.
Yeah. Yep. Keep the ball rolling.
To do it, even if maybe they do take some hits.
Wow. What a great talk. This has been absolutely awesome. David Arvelo, Sucker Punch. Very last thing, 40 seconds. Main event, Ferguson Gaethje. If it happens, who do you got?
Ferguson.
I like it, man. I kept on going back and forth with this fight. And I just think he's got something that Gaethje hasn't even seen yet. You just can't train for Tony Ferg. You just can't train him mentally and physically. And I just think, I think Ferguson doesn't care much about the Khabib because it's happened so many times. I think the other
at some point, man. I mean, it's got to be really hard to like gear up for that again.
Right.
After we're 5 or 6 attempts in now.
Yeah, we're 0-5, man. We are 0-5. It's just not meant to be. And I think Ferguson knows too. This is he's the main event of this first card. The whole card is absolutely stacked. It's one of the greatest cards I've ever seen. He's on the main event. If he wins, I think everyone knows it's probably him and Conor. It could be him and Khabib, but him as the headliner. I think Ferg knows like this fight is it's easily the biggest fight of his career so far. Easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's going to be a good fight, but I mean, I agree with what you said. I mean, it's like Gaethje's a monster himself, but it's like Ferguson is just like I tell people, it's like his kung fu is very strong. It's just you can't put him into a box in terms of like, oh, you're preparing for this. Like the guy's just so good and so tricky everywhere that it's like, man, I mean, he can knock you out or finish you with strikes in different, situations that you normally otherwise wouldn't be thinking that that's an option. I mean, just on the ground. I mean, the guy's, wrestling is great. His jiu-jitsu's off the chain. And he's another guy too. Like, okay, I mean, I don't even know if Gaethje can put him down and keep him down. I don't really think that that's the way it would go necessarily, but let's just say he did. I mean, A, Ferguson's jiu-jitsu is great. And then B, he can stop you from his back, even if that happens.
Right.
I mean, his ability to split dudes open with elbows and just everything else. I mean, that's a threat. I mean, it's just he's dealt with so many injuries that I think some people have forgotten, like just how like dangerous and how freaky of a skill set he actually has. So I mean, I'm going with him. I mean, obviously, Gaethje's a beast, and
right.
The dude's just an absolute juggernaut and just can, knock people into the spirit realm for sure. But I think I'd go with Ferguson on that one. I mean, the rest of that card is really awesome too. I mean, I'm looking forward to it either way, just because, my normal week to week, much to my wife's dismay, is, I'm watching fights usually multiple nights a week or more.
Oh, yeah.
And, when things conflict, I have DVR for the sole reason of recording everything and then catching up on everything afterwards. So, it's like that's my normal thing. And I mean, we're coming up by the time the UFC kicks off, I mean, it will have been almost like 2 months practically with like no fights.
Oh,
so
dude, David, I gave my wife, we did Tiger King, we did Ozark, we did Below Deck Sailing. I gave her Saturday nights for 5 weeks already. It's my turn now. So when
it's time for discerning gentlemen of America to take their Saturday night back,
Absolutely, my man. Dude, always a pleasure. Always love talking to you. You can come back anytime. If anything jumps or pops or promotes, call me. Love to have you. Man, what a great talk. I think is one for the books.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anytime.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you real soon, all right?
All right, later.
Peace. Wow, guys, that is absolutely one of the best podcasts we have had here on the Fight Bananas podcast, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, any podcast platform, and especially YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, like, rate, tell a friend, tell a neighbor, maybe tell an enemy if you're that person. But come on, guys, Fight Bananas, David Arvelo, which is bringing straight facts, stuff out of left field, knowledge on the whole corona pandemic in mixed martial arts, regional scene, the big boy scene, just outrageous conversation. That was just pure gold. You're welcome. And you know how much that we charged you for? Absolutely free. You're welcome. Just, show our sponsors some love. Instill Nutrition, Warhammer Fightwear, Mako Tech Mouthguards. Guys, check them out on Instagram. Mako Tech, TEK_mouthguards. All right? And last but not least, Fusion CBD products. Put in our code FIGHT2020. That's FIGHT2020. FusionCBDProducts.com. Get that CBD oil. Get the Fusion coffee beans. Guys, go to FusionProducts.com. All right, guys, I'm Dave Van Auken. You can follow me on any social media platform, Twitter, the IG, or Facebook at David Van Auken. Spell it correctly. Follow my main man, David_Arvelo, ARVELO on the IG. Great follow. Man, big ups to him. Hopefully the Giants have a good NFL draft. Hopefully you guys are staying home, staying safe. And, I'm Dave Van Auken. We are crazy about fights. And stay bananas.